That's a
never
real
ever.
blessing
Yeah,
because he, I
yeah,
mean, it's I mean, again, listeners, for the just the forward alone is worth getting the book. And we're not going to say, I want you to buy it, so we're not going to get into detail about everything Danny says, but yeah, get this book definitely because of that. But I want to get to some other things because I don't want to give away a lot of things in the books. I mean, you get into a lot of the bios of folks in there, which are really great. But I want to know too. And tell my listeners very briefly about Herb Jeffries, because I know there's some folks out there who may not know who Herb Jeffries was. I know because I saw, in the 70s, I had the opportunity to see some of his old movies and realize he was the first black cowboy in movies that had a starring role. But talk a little more about him.
yeah. It was 1937, 38, 39. He made a series of four movies, and they were, I don't. This is sometimes you hear the word
Don't
campy.
be nice.
Hey,
I'll
sometimes
be
you hear
honest
the word
about
campy, and people don't always take that as a positive. But
right.
that fits what those movies were. They were camping. They were campy, black
Right.
singing cowboy movies.
Which were
They
the
were black
same as the
western.
Gene Autry
He
and
was
Roy
a
Rogers
singing
movies.
cowboy.
Right.
They were, yeah, it was to black westerns what the Apple Dumpling Gang would have been to westerns, right?
Right.
It was of that ilk, right? But it's a comedy. It was meant to make
Right.
you. It was meant to make you laugh, and he was known as the Bronze Buckaroo, Harlem on the Prairie, Two Gun Man from Harlem. Like the titles said it all to
Right.
begin with, and but give Herb credit. He saw that on his own. He was the one who set out to want to bring that to the big screen, and they played largely initially in the late 30s. They largely played at all black movie theaters, but then later really found an audience um, of people of all races and all backgrounds and
Right.
all ethnicities, and now today the posters and the images from those movies are
They're priceless.
pretty popular and commonplace on the internet.
Oh yeah, and I saw the Two Guns from Harlem at the University of the District of Columbia in Washington D.C. like in '77,
Wow.
and I have to say that the movie, it was in an auditorium, and the place was packed, and everyone, you know, we're in their early 20s, teenagers, and all in there, and everyone was mesmerized. The movie was over 30 some years old, but everyone was hypnotized by the movie because there was a black cowboy up there. And
Yeah.
it was silly and campy, just like the Roy Rogers and Gene Autry movies were in a sense. But it was something to see and to know that happened. And I remember something, I'm not going to quote him, I can't remember the quote exactly, but Fred Williamson, the actor and football player Fred Williamson, he said he was
Yeah.
inspired to get in movies eventually because of Herb Jeffries and the Bronze Buckaroo. He said he was hypnotized when he saw it when he was a kid,
I
going to
think
a
there were
black
a
theater.
number of actors who were inspired by that. I think Woody Strode was
Oh
inspired
yeah, oh
by
God,
Herb Jeffries.
oh
Yeah.
yes,
Rex Purefoy, who didn't really become a Hollywood cowboy like his hero Herb, but he became one of the greatest trick ropers, let alone
oh
black
yeah,
trick ropers in the world. Um, and he was the whole notion, the whole idea of being a performer came from him wanting to be like Herb Jeffries.
man, that's really something. Because when I was growing up as a kid in the '60s, I mentioned earlier I love Western, still do in one sense, but I would always like look at everything with kind of a side eye. I'm looking at John Wayne, I'm looking at Clint Eastwood or something, saying, well, yeah, but when I go home from the movie theater, my friends I'm playing with, we're all black. And so this doesn't compute in my mind. But when someone like a Sammy Davis would appear in the scene, or Woody Strode, I remember the theater would just light up. I remember I would light up, and and I would say to myself, this is the way it should be. And
Yeah.
I got to know more. This is the way it really is.
Yeah. Well, and it's really unfortunate that the truth of the matter is when Hollywood initially popularized the Western, we were in segregation
Right.
and moving into civil rights, and and network executives and studio executives, the honest truth was they did not have the courage to put a black man on a horse and call him a hero. And
No.
therefore, a lot of times there would be a token black character, and that might be on a trail drive, and they played the part of the cook over the campfire. And that's really, really unfortunate. And I know there were exceptions. I know there was Sergeant Rutledge,
Right.
if you go
With
back.
Woody Strode, yeah.
And there's a
And
lot
prior
of
to that, I'll give you one you probably don't know. John Wayne, in one of his early movies, had an actor in there. He was kind of comedy relief, but when you looked at him and said, wait a minute, this guy's taller than Wayne. He actually should be the star. And he does save the day for John Wayne in the movie. And it's a guy named Blue Washington. Blue
right.
Washington, yeah, who was also in the Negro Leagues, and his son was Kenny Washington, the great football player. He was in, I think, 1932 in a movie, something about a haunted house, but he saves the day.
Yeah.
And I think because of that and the way he looks in the movie, they never put him in the movie again as far as being a cowboy as a basically he was the co-star of the movie.
It's really interesting. And if you listen to a filmmaker like Spike Lee, he has nothing good to say about John Ford. He'll use some salty, colorful language
right.
when talking about John Ford. And that got me thinking along those same lines. But then as I was doing some research and reading more and more about Woody Strode, and you find out in John Ford's last days, when he's dying, when he's in bed dying, it wasn't John Wayne who sat by his bedside.
No.
It was Woody Strode.
Right.
And then that gives me a little pause. I obviously can't, Woody Strode has passed away and will never really be able, not ever really be able, we never will be able to have a conversation with him to ask him about that. But
well, I don't know if you've ever read his autobiography, Woody Strode.
I have, but it doesn't go into enough depth.
Yeah, I understand.
In that regard, he sets the scene. He talks about the scene. He talks about the moment. So I know it's in his autobiography. I know it happened. It absolutely happened because this man wrote about it in his autobiography. It was also written about in a couple of the biographies written about Woody Strode. But to really have an extended conversation with him and be able to say, hey, what about the fact that so many other people look at John Ford as pilferating the notion that the West was without color, because people don't read history. They have to see it. And so when you were referencing earlier today about so many people still today who never saw the West as having any kind of color, it's because they didn't see it in movies until the last 2-3 years.
Right.
and we've had some Black Westerns, and we're starting to have more and more articles in magazines and on the internet and books coming out talking about Black cowboys. But again, the book is good for after people see it, and then they might go find a book to want to know more. But they're not going to find it initially in a book. They need to see it on TV, and then when they Google it, a book comes up, and then maybe they're so inclined to say, I want to know more. But
Right.
on their own, they wouldn't know to go look for stories about Black cowboys, because if they haven't seen it, it doesn't occur to them that it exists. We see history, and then maybe that influences us to read about history. And it pains me to say that because I'm a writer.
Well, I want my listeners who are listening into the show to get the book, Black Cowboys of Rodeo, Unsung Heroes from Harlem to Hollywood and the American West. And the author we're talking to today, Keith Ryan Cartwright. It's on the University of Nebraska Press. Get that book. Don't come to me later on saying, well, I still don't know about Black cowboys. Here's the book. Here's the new book. You'll learn about the history of, not only, cowboys of today and the past, but also, and I like what you do with this at the beginning of the book, you get in a whole chronology of the history of African Americans in America.
Yes,
and I like how you throw in cowboys. I mean, it's just amazing how you do it.
Well, and I did that on purpose. I wanted people to be able to have a reference where they could compare and contrast what was happening in the world of Black cowboys and Black rodeo cowboys, and where it is in context to American history and African American history. I think it's important for people to make that association, that what was happening at the same time. It's important for me, I think, for people to realize that the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing the right to vote for all citizens regardless of race, is passed in 1870, the same year that Bill Pickett is born. And 13 years before Jesse Stahl is born. It's important to know that President Harry Truman ends segregation in the armed forces in 1948, and that's the first time that Willie Thomas competes at a rodeo at the Black Diamond Ranch for the first time, or that Harold Cash and Tex Williams are born that year. And then you learn that, okay, Tex Williams goes on to become the first African American to win a high school state title in rodeo.
Amazing.
In the state of Texas. And he not only wins one, he wins three of them in the first state that comes to mind when you think of cowboys and rodeo. And then here's a Black cowboy becoming the first one to win a state high school title.
Yeah.
And he'll tell you he never really set out to become the first to win. He just wanted to win a world title or a state title and be considered among the best. Not just the best Black cowboy, but it's worth noting he was the first Black cowboy to do that in the state of Texas.
And there are so many other stories like that in the book. It's just amazing. I wish I could talk to you all day, because I'd like to ask you about some of the folks you interview, but we won't do that on this show. I have to invite you back on here. But is there anything you want to say to my listeners in the final little 2 minutes we have here? Anything as far as what they should know about the book, or what you would suggest to them, or anything?
If you don't mind, I think my thoughts were summed up at the very beginning of the book. And it's a little tiny passage that I wrote. And if you don't mind, I'll
Go
read
right ahead.
that.
Go right ahead.
And for me,